diversity, equity, and inclusion. Would you like to hear from the expert's expert on this topic who has been working in the cultural diversity space since 1992 and is also now working with conscious aging? If that's you, join me with my next guest, Tom Verghese. Let's go.
Hi folks, welcome to the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast by Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter. In this podcast, Gary shares everything about servant leadership, service leadership, authentic leadership, how to create high performance cultures, service excellence, and life balance. Here's your host, Gary Ryan.
Thank you, Sienna, for your lovely introduction, folks. As you know, I'm here with Tom Verghese. Tom, how you doing?
I'm really well, Gary. Thank you.
You've been jet setting all over the world recently doing your diversity work and maybe conscious aging too. Tell us a little bit about your trips recently.
Well, I've just been away for the last month. I had a trip. Actually a trip into India, working with a client in Bangalore, and then I came to Singapore, did some work there, took some time off. I had my wife join me there, which was nice. To always like to mix business and pleasure, which is one of the advantages, of course, for working for yourself.
Including a whiskey bar in Singapore, if I recall.
Yes, I tell you, the place that we stayed in, it was a very funky hotel. It had a collection of 1,100 different whiskeys and live jazz music on 3 nights a week. So it was fantastic. We had a really fun time there. And Singapore is a really great city, great place to travel. It's fun, it has a variety of things you can do. So we finished that, and then I headed back to India, to Pune, to finish off another assignment, and then headed back to Perth.
And were these assignments in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space?
They were, yes. Yeah. Yes, they were. The DEI space, yep.
So you've had cultural synergy since 1992.
That's correct. Woo! I started it when I was 10 years old, Gary.
Of course you were 10 years old, Tom. Of course you were. This is one of the things I love about Tom. I love his laugh. He's got the best infectious laugh ever, as you're picking up now, folks. So a lot of people think DEI is relatively recent, but here you were in 1992. So tell us about, how you got started, and I guess has anything really shifted over time, or is it really still the same?
Okay, well, how did I get started? We had a recession we needed to have here in 1990. For those people who were in Australia then. And I lost my job. I was unemployed. And so I did a values inventory exercise, and I decided to go back to school. And in that process, I was looking for a topic for my master's. One of my friends at that time, who was from the United States, said to me, you should look at this area called diversity and inclusion. It's big in the US, it probably becomes big here. So I started reading on it. And when I came across the topic of cross-culture, it just really resonated for me, Gary. Because growing up in Malaysia, we learn at a very early age how to navigate cultural differences. And so when I read the literature, read about the data, I thought, wow, this makes perfect sense for me. And then sometimes, when you're aligned, things fall into place. It sounds a bit woo-woo, but I'm a believer in that. There was an airline here at that time. They just started flying into Asia. They were having some challenges with Asian customers. Somebody put me in front of them, said, hey, listen, can you do some cross-cultural work with our teams? And then that became an 18-month research project for me.
So I'm curious, Tom, like what was the cultural issues that they were having with the customers?
Well, so for instance, at that time, they found it really difficult to say the Japanese customers coming into some of the lounges They weren't availing themselves of the food and the drink without being invited. Okay, so that was one. Another example was just the whole around language, how to use language, and of course, English. So it's like, so it was like, how do we? Because hospitality in an Asian context is quite different to hospitality within the Australian context.
Yes.
So it was getting the Australian teams to understand, so how do we actually practice hospitality with our guests who have a different expectation?
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Mm.
And so, starting there not quite accidentally, but to some degree, you said the universe sort of lined things up and
Yeah.
you got going. What have been the most significant shifts, if any, in the diversity, inclusion, and equity space?
I think I think there's been a number of different things. So if you think about the topic of diversity, we've certainly been talking about it really since the 60s. Okay, but it started in the space of gender. Yeah, and then it's just started taking momentum. But one of the challenges that all of us have had as practitioners and as organizations is, how do you have impact in there? Because one of the things that we've learned, and we constantly keep learning, is that it's one thing to have personal agency. So in other words, I can be motivated to go and say, well, I want to do things differently. I want to shift the way things are. However, I work within a system. So when we think about any of the isms, e.g., sexism, ageism, racism, all these are systemic. They're structural.
Mm.
So the challenge becomes, how do we shift some of those systems that are so embedded?
Mm.
And part of it is recognizing it and then dismantling it. And we saw that with the Me Too movement. We saw that with the Black Lives Matter, because that suddenly took a lot of precedence, and lots of organizations got on board saying, okay, we've got to really change some of this. And I think a lot of work was done. And then in many ways, it lost some momentum. And it's taken a bit of I think it slid backwards now.
And what would be the data or the evidence for you that it's gone backwards, Tom?
It's not so much of it's the conversation piece in the zeitgeist right now.
Right.
In just where does it sit, how important is it, etc. And there is I think an element of truth that you can't leave diversity inclusion to the DEI folks. It's a leadership practice. So we spend a lot of time talking about inclusive leadership. And today, you need to be an inclusive leader because you are dealing with diversity. Diversity is all around us. So it's not about how do I lead with diversity. Diversity is already there. It's how do I be inclusive? So how do I be inclusive, conscious of gender, age, culture, neurodiversity, thinking styles, sexual orientation, religious differences? How do I blend all that in my teams? Because it's there.
Yes, I'm not sure if you saw my interview with Michelle Hunt from dreammakers.org. And Michelle Hunt,
No, I did not.
One of my heroes. She's an incredible African-American woman who was constantly a glass ceiling breaker in her career, both in American politics, where she was an advisor to President Clinton. She also worked in Herman Miller for Max Dupree.
Okay.
World famous for its culture.
Yes.
Yeah. And she was in that organization, the first female, let alone in her own language, black female, to be on the executive team, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
She shared some interesting perspectives given the life that she lived. And I do need to add that Michelle grew up on military bases in the USA with her father,
Mm-hmm.
who was the only African-American military officer. So they were
Right.
the only in a,
Only. They were the only.
they were the only like they were the only, in her
Yes.
words, black family on the bases, right? So you can imagine how brutally racist her upbringing was, but the way her parents prepared her for that from a values perspective was incredible. And that's why she talks about her dream maker parents. That's where her company's name came from.
Right.
But her perspective about diversity was that, as you were saying, there are so many layers to it. It's about enabling people, and you said the word unique. It's about enabling people to bring their unique talents, no matter what their diversity is, because she says everyone's unique.
Yep.
And she shared a story where at a point in time, and I'm really interested in your perspective on this, Tom, that she said at a point in time, Herman Miller were doing ratios like quotas
Yes.
for different categories. And she said we very quickly realized that actually was counterproductive to what we were trying to do, because it was, in some instances, stopping the uniqueness of some people because they didn't tick a right box, but they had this unique characteristic that actually was valued. So they said when they focused on uniqueness, the diversity came with it. Does that make sense? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I think there is. So if we put a cultural lens on it, uniqueness is fine when you're working and talking to people who come from an individualistic culture,
Sure.
right? Because I can own my uniqueness. But if you're talking to people who live and work in collectivist cultures, Japan, Korea, all these places, which is all around group orientation, the concept of uniqueness becomes really difficult as a concept, because it's not an inherent value that people grow up with. Whereas in individualistic cultures, from a very early age, the messaging you are given is stand up and be counted, right? The squeaky door gets the oil, right? Like, so I am unique, as compared to the nail that sticks out gets beaten down, right?
Love it.
Fit in. So it's contextual. So I think sometimes it's important for us to appreciate. So just to the point around targets, because I have this conversation with my clients have over the years, people going, does it help? Doesn't it? It's always contextual. Where is the organization on the maturity journey? Okay. So again, it's about how we got to be thinking about diversity. We got to be thinking about difference. It's not sameness. And so one of the challenges we have whenever we work with organizations is that organizations want, the reason why organizations succeed, or the reason why they work in multiple countries, is we have similar systems, structures, processes that help us do things the same, right? That's advantages to that.
Yes.
At the same time, what we want to appreciate is that when we think about diversity, diversity is about difference, and diversity can be global, but inclusion is local.
Okay.
Right? So, because what works in terms of inclusion in one context may not work in another context.
Yes. So diversity is global, inclusion is local.
It's local.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So with your experience, this vast experience that you've had, and you mentioned about that being a leadership issue, and you also mentioned that it's about fundamentally systemic structures.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that all organizations are different, etc. But are there some classic systemic structural changes that you've been able to catalyze and witness that you go, you know what? If someone said, what's a key structural change? And I know that there's probably more than one, but is there a key one that you just know, hey, if you do this, it might not solve the entire issue, but it definitely gets you on the right path.
That's a good question, Gary. I'm not sure I can think if there's one thing that you could do. You know, I think it is incumbent upon leaders to appreciate that as a leader, I have my own biases. Right? Like, I am a bias sense-making machine. That's how I navigate the world based on my upbringing, my age, my culture, my education, my experiences. That's my view of the world. I mean, I have multiple lenses, and that's the way I look at it. So, as a leader, how do I invite perspectives that are different to me? Because other people see the world differently. Now, I don't have to agree with those perspectives. As a leader, though, I want to be able to be open to actually thinking, okay, how does that look? How do I invite that in? Are there things in my blind spot that I don't see? Because inevitably, as I journey through the organization, the structure, it becomes very different. So I'll give you an example of something that we did with a client, and it was around gender diversity. And one of the tasks, the CEO, who was a man, was very interested in understanding what the experience was like of being a woman in this particular organization. So we did an exercise where he had to have conversations, 10 interviews, 10 with 10 women sliced across the organization. And the caveat was he couldn't, once he asked the question, he had to sit back and listen. So in other words, you couldn't explain, you couldn't justify, you couldn't say, oh, well, the reason that this happened or the reason you experience, you just had to sit back, shut up, listen. And Gary, I've got to say, at the end of those experiences, he described that as the most transformational experience he's ever had.
Oh, that is just beautiful. I mean, that's a structure right there. You just
That's a structure.
Hey, go and find some people that might represent the diversity and the inclusion that you want to enhance, or the equity that you want to enhance. Go speak with them. I mean, Peter Drucker said decades ago, go and ask them.
Yes.
Said,
I mean, the pioneer management consultant.
go, like, stop sitting in your boardroom or stop sitting in your executive management team room and go and ask them. And Tom, like, I must admit, and one of the greatest frustrations I do have in my work is still the reticence to go and ask them.
Yes. Yes. I think because one of the things, Gary, is what happens is we are reluctant to go and ask because I may not be able to do anything about it. Okay. So sometimes you need to be able to address that. So I'm running in 2 weeks' time a large all organization kind of a day. Okay. And this organization is having a few issues, and we are going to ask for feedback. Like, so what are some things that I can do, personal agency? And what are some of the things we want to hear from the team, from the leadership team? Okay. And we're gonna extract that. And I have already primed my client, right? The CEO. I've said, listen, there's going to be some things that's going to be coming out that you are not going to be comfortable with. Now, it's really important. Not saying that we can fix all of that. We're not going to solve any of that. It's really important when we hear them for you to say, okay, I'm going to take this on board. We're going to discuss this. I'm going to come back to you with some action, right? I mean, it may not be all. Maybe here's a list of 10. Might do 2, can't do 5, but whatever. But I say we want to be demonstrating we're listening.
Yes.
And we want to be demonstrating we're doing something. Okay, because appreciate that at sometimes at a senior level, you have a much more macro view of the organization, and you can appreciate, look, there's certain things we just can't do, certain things we can't shift, etc. The challenge, if you're going to ask people and they're going to give us some stuff, then there's some things that we can do, there's certain things we can shift.
Oh yeah, yeah. Look, no doubt you've been there too, that people go and do something like this and then they turn around and say, but we don't have any budget to do anything about the things that you told us to do. So, well, that's when you're just sending the message. This is not serious. Like you have to have that foresight to go, if I'm going to go down this path, I have to have a budget somewhere to do something.
Yes.
I cannot have that as an excuse for not doing anything, because I'm just telling people, I just went and ticked a box. That's all I did. I wasted your time. And all that does is drive down engagement even further.
That's right.
And empties the trust, the trust jar just gets emptied as well. So
yes, exactly.
They're under, this company and the CEO are in good hands with you there, Tom. That's for sure.
Well, I would hope so. So we've been working with this organization for a while. And to your point around budget is a useful thing, Gary, for us to appreciate that. I've been a consultant now, an independent consultant now for more than 30 years, right? So you can appreciate we're going into organizations. I've worked with multiple organizations from large multinationals to small not-for-profits. And a key realization I have had is if it's important enough, we'll find the money from somewhere. Okay, we'll find, because what is a budget apart from a figure? So, we can move from money from this bucket to that bucket, as we do in our own personal finances. That's what we do at home, don't we?
100%. I mean, it's often, my experience is money is actually never the problem.
Never.
It's will.
You're right.
It's will. Will is the problem. It's not money, right? It's the will to actually take action. If you've got the will, you find the money.
The money from somewhere. You'll do something, or you'll create constraints and say, okay, well, say with less money, what could we do? Or, because there's lots of things that you can do without money. Because, let's face it, energy, ideas, innovation, there are lots of things we can do. It's really to your point. How do I have the will and how do I get the engagement?
Yes.
And why is it important? Because if it's important enough, going back to if it's important enough,
and
we'll find the way.
The example you've just given about the transformational commentary from that leader with interviewing, in this case, the 10 women. Now, the story on its own of, hey, I spent however long those interviews were, but those 10 women will be telling stories within that company about, I felt heard. Now, if there's then action that demonstrates they were definitely heard to some degree, that can be done, the power of that is exponential.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Now, that's an element that arguably has cost nothing from a budgetary point of view other than to get your advice, right?
Yep.
But it has taken time and effort. Which are the three, we've all got time and effort. Yeah? So if you have no money, put in the time and effort.
Time, effort, and energy.
Yeah, time, effort,
and energy.
Yeah, of course. Yes, you're correct. Time, effort, energy. And you get amazing results from that. Now, talking about time, effort, and energy, a space that you've evolved into throughout your journey is conscious aging. So would you mind explaining, because I'm not sure that most folk necessarily in my audience would know what that term means. So what does it mean, and what are you doing in that space, Tom?
Well, I think, so just taking a step back, in terms of, this is in the last 5 years, it's become more and more important for me. And again, going back to the same thing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is very important for me, because personally, when I came across the literature, I thought, this works for me. When I was about to turn 60, in the Indian culture, turning 60 is seminal. It's the beginning of the age of renunciation. I felt there was something within me, the existential question around, so what's the next stage of my life going to look like? What do I need to do differently? So, as is my style of learning, I started inquiring, having conversations, reading, etc. And I came across this concept of how do we make aging aspirational? Because we live in a society which is very youth oriented. Okay, so all of us are living longer, Gary. Most of us are having to work longer, etc. And yet, how do we embrace the next 20, 30 years of our life in a way that's aspirational? What are some of the things that we want to be doing compared to, say, the lifestyle that, say, our parents and grandparents had? We are in a different life stage.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, conscious aging is about being much more aware of the transitions as I get older. So therefore, shifts that I may need to make spiritually, physically, financially, emotionally, intellectually. What are some of these things that I need to do that I can embark into the next stages of my life?
Yes.
And part of that is also about how do I step up to being an elder?
Yes.
So I feel, again, personal belief that we are lacking role models.
Yes.
And especially for lots of men who are also, in terms of a diversity issue, we've had a lot of talk on diversity for gender, specifically for women, but I think there's also there's a group of men who are feeling quite disengaged, not quite knowing how to navigate. You get told, don't do this, don't do that, don't, etc. But very little messaging of do this.
Yes.
And do that. So as we get older, it doesn't mean we automatically become an elder, because to be an elder is a skill.
Yes.
So how do I develop the skills to be an elder? So that's an area of interest for me. And I see myself pursuing that more as I get older.
Yes. And I mean, culturally, a lot of indigenous cultures, including our own, I should not say that, the indigenous culture in Australia, I'm an indigenous ally, and I've learned I've not to say an ownership statement like our indigenous culture, because I don't own it. So I am going to correct myself there live for the audience.
Good pickup, Gary. Good pickup.
I'm correcting myself there. So the indigenous culture in Australia, like many indigenous cultures around the world, have elders, which, as you said, in their cultures as well, is not something that's automatic. It is it is earned and bestowed upon you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's bestowed.
Yes. So I'm interested from a conscious aging perspective for non-Indigenous peoples for whom the concept of an elder may not be part of their cultural heritage.
No. And most people reject that. They reject the term because it means I'm old.
Yeah, oh, you're just old, right? Yeah, because I'm interested, because I really respect the elders that I've had the good fortune to meet, and I agree with you, Tom, that I think there is something missing in our modern society here in Australia at the moment around having elders and wise people, that people know who they are and they trust them and they seek counsel from them. And I'm interested in conscious aging and what that might mean for people of Indigenous backgrounds, but equally, and people of other cultural backgrounds where elders aren't a part of the cultural heritage. But equally, what does it mean for the Australians for whom elders is not part of their cultural heritage?
So therefore, if it's not part of my cultural heritage, what does it mean for me to be an elder? What does it mean for me to be a role model? How do I share the life lessons that I have had to those coming after me? Now, I appreciate that there'll be aspects of life that are very different, right? So it's like as we see with our children, there's no doubt about that. And at the same time, there are also certain things which are the same. I mean, relationships, right? Communication, dealing with conflict, mindset. These are things that just get shifted. So how do I perhaps pass that on? And the thing about being an elder, one of the key things you learn about this is that when it comes to wisdom, you can't teach wisdom. You can only share.
Mm,
You can only share wisdom. Yeah. And in any form of coaching, as you would know, Gary, you can't coach anyone who doesn't want to be coached,
correct.
right? So that's rule number one.
Rule number one.
You need to be coachable, you need to be open to coaching. So the same thing with this is like, how do we pass on some of the lessons learned to people who may be interested? And how do I perhaps share some of the learnings that I have had, for instance, in terms of managing teams or dealing with conflict or having had challenges with my children, right? Like, how do I share that perhaps with another parent who may be having challenges with their children? No, I can advise them on it, but I can say, listen, here perhaps some things to consider, or have you thought about that? Like it's it's having that sounding board. So
Yeah.
if you think about it traditionally, Gary, about when we were much more communal, when we had multi-generational families, you did have someone to talk to, right? Whereas now in our nuclear families, we're not having as much exposure to people who are older. I find, for instance, that it's difficult not just to talk about aging with people even in my generation. It's really difficult to talk about death.
Mm,
Okay, people don't want to talk about it. It's kind of taboo about it, rather than appreciating all of us will die at one stage. I mean, we will transition out, right, at some stage. So, how do I be prepared for it? What are some of the things, what are some of the conversations I need to have prior before that occurs? Because I don't know when I'm going to exit,
no.
right?
Yeah. It's fascinating for me the you mentioned our life experiences and our own view, I guess, of what we think aging is. But my father was 45 when my twin brother and I were born.
Right. Okay.
So I'm 55 now, and I can remember my dad when he was 55. Now, when I remember my
So
dad,
you were 10. Yes.
I was
Yes.
10. So I can remember 10 reasonably
Yes.
vividly, right?
Yes. Yes.
When I look at myself now, I don't think or feel or believe I'm anything like what he was at 55. I feel so much younger in inverted commas, but
Yes.
maybe that's just me. Maybe it's not even true. Maybe it's just my perspective, and I've convinced myself that that's the case. But everything about him in my memory, and unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 70. So he didn't, in today's terms, he didn't get to live, particularly long life.
Actually,
Uh,
yes.
and obviously, I was only 20. I was actually 24 at the time when he passed. But just my memory of him is that like he was like he's old man, like he's an old man. But I don't
Yes.
think of that of myself.
Yes. Correct. Because we are living differently today, Gary.
Yes.
We are living differently. We are far more attuned to our health needs, our physical, mental, spiritual needs. So we're just much more attuned to that. And we are far more active at, say, 55, definitely, than it was in your father's generations, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we live differently today. So there is a mindset that goes with it. Now, does that apply to everybody? No. But I think for most people, it applies because we are living longer. So if we're going to be living longer, and let's say we retire, if you think about most people say retiring at 67, if you're going to be living till you're, say, 85, that's 20 years.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do for 20 years?
Wait. They're going to wait.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not me. I'm not waiting. I'm
No,
doing. I'm
you're
doing
doing.
the end. I already know I'm doing. Whatever that is, I ain't waiting. I promise you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to be able to live your life in such a way, saying, look, I want to make the most of it while I can.
Yes.
Right. So it's also being grateful, grateful for our health, grateful that we live in a country where we have the opportunity to try different things. And at the same time, then, so based on what I've learned, based on the things and experiences I've had, how can I make it easier for someone else?
Yes.
Like, what can I do to, pass my hand down? It's one of the things I love when I talk to leaders. I get leaders to look over their careers and think about who was it who gave them the break? Because somebody did. Somebody put you on a project. Somebody took a punt on you. Somebody moved you to a particular. Somebody did. So, which then gave you the exposure. And we're all of us are the same. All of us. And I'm always grateful for the number of clients who gave me opportunities as a consultant. Because my career went up in many different ways because of the clients.
Yes, of course.
So I'm grateful. And then I, in turn, try to do that with junior consultants and say, listen, have you thought about that? Or try this or whatever, because I'm not on that journey. But if I can share a couple of things with you, or here's something that helped me with that, or here's a way to deal with that particular situation.
That's the wisdom being passed from one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You pass it on, you pass it on.
Yeah. So with cultural synergies, what are some of the best ways for people to reach out and contact you for possible engagements on the DEI space and also on this conscious aging area as well, Tom?
Well, with cultural synergies, definitely you can come to our website, www.culturalsynergies.com. And conscious aging, we have consciousaging.com.au.
Okay, brilliant. And of course, you're on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, etc. So, and again, I think it's all of us, Gary, are a pathway of our lives, right? It's a journey, and the thing becomes along the way we meet people. I mean, just like how you and I connected, all those years ago, right? So along the way, that's what I'm saying. You connect with certain people, and then you link up, and you have some form of relationship that kind of we traverse. And then your success becomes, I think, fantastic. I love it when I read your success and read about your publication, read about all the different things that you're doing. I think it's fantastic. Good for you.
Yeah, 100%. Likewise, that's how it rolls, isn't it? It's just like
exactly. It doesn't take anything off me. You see what I'm saying? It's like go good. All boats rise in the high tide.
Yes. That's a lot.
So it's like, how do we have a mindset of generosity? How do we have a mindset of abundance?
So that's a nice little lead into my final question, which I ask most guests, and that is, the podcast is called the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. So maybe in the context of rising tides and all boats rise in the tide, potentially, what does moving beyond being good mean to you, Tom?
Oh, it's a good question, Gary. beyond good.
They're being good, moving beyond being good.
Moving beyond being good. I would think for me, what that means is it swings for me, and what's coming up for me is it's swinging back to elderhood. It's like it's the gifting back. I'm far more conscious now of tangible time on the planet, not in a negative kind of way, but I have lived more life than I have.
Appreciate that. Yeah, you
So,
acknowledge that. It's true. Yes.
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 So I'm of course living in Perth. I'm going to be in Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time, and there's a gathering. We're doing a men's group on a weekend. On one of the weekends, I'm away with a group of good friends of mine, and someone reminded me that the last time we got together was in fact 5 years ago.
Wow.
As a weekend, we did a weekend 5 years ago where we discussed the topic of conscious aging, and so now 5 years on, we are getting together, and I sent an email saying, from 5 years ago to now, firstly, isn't it fantastic we're all still around?
I was going to ask, will there be some empty chairs?
No, we're all still there, right? What a blessing that is.
Oh,
what a blessing.
Yes.
Okay. And then it's like, so 5 years on, what are some of the changes that we have all experienced in all the different aspects of our lives? That's going to be our opening reflection.
I love it. I love it. Elders reflecting together, I'm hearing here.
Yeah.
And creating more wisdom as a result, Tom.
Yeah. And we're all still on a journey, Gary, right? There's no end point. I don't think you come to the end, come to the top of the mountain and say, okay, I'm here at the top. But as you know, you come to the top, you realize, oh, wow, there's another one.
Tom, talking about, clearly, I think the audience can see you and I could keep talking for quite some time, but we do need to create a finite episode. I want to appreciate your time and wisdom sharing with us all on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast, Tom. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, Gary. Thank you for having me as a guest. It's been fun chatting with you.
It's always fun chatting with you. That's been my experience. So, folks, please make sure that you check out culturalsynergies.com and also consciousaging.com.au. We'll have all of those links in the show notes. No doubt you've been able to see why I have called Tom the expert of experts when it comes to DEI and conscious aging. He's got immense wisdom, and I'm very, very grateful for him joining us on this show. Folks, make sure you click the like button and the notification button so that you get every new episode when they come out. Once again, I'm Gary Ryan, the host of the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time.